Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga speculation video. So this one's going to be my thoughts going into chapter 16, which is coming out in about a week. Once again, the timing on this one is because just earlier on today, we did get the official preview page for this chapter. So this is one of the pages that is going to be in the upcoming chapter. And as you can see here, it features Shinki's teammates here. So we have Yodo and Araya. They are here and they basically welcome Konohamaru to the Land of Wind, which is interesting by itself because, like, okay, the sand plot has sort of started at this point. Whatever fights we end up having, these two are clearly going to be involved in, I guess, fighting against Ryu to try and free Shinki, whatever way that's going to work. I'm not really sure about the Konohamaru connection to this necessarily. Like, stuff is going to have to happen here, but why specifically Konohamaru and what are we doing out here necessarily? I'm not really sure. This is where we're going to need to see more pages from the chapter to properly figure it out. But yeah, that's what's going on here. So let's jump in here with what actually happened in the last chapter, so we have a little bit of a sense for what they're doing up next. Because of course, chapter 16 is going to be a volume-ending chapter. It's divisible by 4, meaning it's going to be the last one in volume 4 for 2 Blue Vortex. And usually, these are somewhat notable chapters. There's going to be something in here that either sets up a big next volume or just by itself is going to be pretty notable. So, we got a bunch of stuff. So we basically got the backstory on what exactly happened with Shinki and also Gaara. Gaara wanted to do the sacrifice, but Shinki did it instead, thinking that Gaara was more important as the leader of the village. So Shinki is a tree now, which we know, while Gaara is actually protected by Shinki's sealing jutsu. We learn that only Shinki, but then also that Ryu, are capable of undoing the sealing jutsu, I guess, because the Divine Tree characters kind of have a matching chakra signature to the person that they're based on. So that's interesting. And that's obviously going to be a plot point that we see somewhat soon. But anyway, little detail here that I'm guessing there'll be some character drama surrounding this, or they're just directly pointing out that, oh, we don't want Tamari to know. Tamari might already know. Tamari's going to be involved somewhere is kind of my guess with this plot point, rather than, I think, excessive focus on drama. Though it is Kankuro specifically telling Shikamaru about this. And the one thing going on with Shikamaru is that there's a little bit of a web of kind of lies kind of going on here, where like he's trying to keep a lot intact, where he's kind of seen through the omnipotence but kind of has to keep up a bunch of lies about who he's actually supporting or not in the village. And now here's another thing he kind of has to potentially lie about. So they could go down the road here of just, you know, people not trusting Shikamaru, but it also could just be a setup for like, okay, Tamari's going to find out and probably going to want to rush to help her brother, but we'll see what happens there. We learned that Ryu's target is Gaara. Of course, each of the Divine Tree characters do have a target, so we learned that Ryu's naturally is Gaara. So, makes a lot of sense. This will probably come into play like pretty soon is my guess, because Gaara is of course trapped in a sealing jutsu, but we also basically need Gaara free to, I think, have the proper fight that we're ultimately going to get with Ryu. So this Ryu basically has to free Gaara, and either we're going to have the fight then and there, or we're going to escape from Ryu is I think the idea here. Very interesting detail on the Divine Tree side of the chapter, where we did get the idea of Jura wondering what would happen if one of them, a Divine Tree character, ate a chakra fruit. Code, of course, gets introduced at this point, and it effectively results in Jura defeats Code, Code loses an arm, and Jura offers Code a deal. Basically kill Boruto and his accomplices, basically Kashin Koji plus others, in exchange for the chakra fruit. Seems like a deal that Code would want, but immediately afterwards it just seems like Jura has no actual want to go ahead with this necessarily, because he's already wondered what would happen if he ate the chakra fruit, even if Code was to succeed somehow, which seems implausible. I don't think he's going to hand over a chakra fruit ultimately, because we don't even know what exactly is going to happen when one actually grows, or what's going to be left as a result of that. So, you know, it's basically just the idea. Code continues to come across quite pathetically as a character, loss after loss, and it doesn't seem like he's going to get a win anytime soon. And we've finally got an update on Momoshiki with Boruto. So we find out that Momoshiki has not been active. He's basically been quiet for the past 3 years. But the idea is that the karma seems to make Boruto very much feel like Momoshiki has a high likelihood of breaking out when he uses it. This is why he is so afraid of what happens when his karma activates, the resonance and stuff like that. So that remains a plot point, but almost like an interesting one that they made the decision to go with the idea of like, oh yeah, it's just the lingering threat. And like the silence probably maybe means a lot more than if Momoshiki was talking to Boruto constantly over the years. But because he has been the sort of character to often, I think, gloat just with Momoshiki's personality, I'm almost like, what is going on here? What is the plan for Momoshiki? There has to be something that eventually happens here. So what are we doing? Then the big one here, the Boruto-Kawaki conversation. Boruto, of course, needs Kawaki to get stronger, to take down Jura. So using what he learned from Kashin Koji, he basically tells him that, like, oh yeah, basically confront Amado. He's the reason you're not as powerful as you should be. He has placed limiters on you and also like adjusted your abilities to be more like self-recovery, defensive focused, when that should be a bit more balanced. So that's an interesting one. More minor point, but Amado now seems to know that Kashin Koji is alive and seems quite interested in sort of like, well, his mission is complete. What's he doing right now? So that one could be quite interesting. And the setup is that, yes, Kawaki is going to partner with Boruto to take out the divine trees, and then the idea is that afterwards we'll deal with the issues between the two of them, ultimately. With Boruto even kind of, like, the two of them almost, like, agreeing to a certain degree at the end to, like, well, if the way it has to happen is that to get rid of all the Otsutsukis, like, both of us have to die, you know, so be it. There's a very kind of sacrificial aspect to this, throwing their lives away almost. So a little bit on both sides of this. It'll be interesting to see what exactly happens here. But anyway, let's get into some more kind of analysis here. So, preview page, what's going on here? Why is Konohamaru heading to the Land of Wind? We didn't directly set this up in the last chapter, so it's I guess just going to be the beginning of this plot. I'd be surprised if this is a huge part of the chapter, unless they basically decide to make some sort of a giant confrontation with Ryu, what most of this chapter actually is. The connection between all these characters obviously would be the idea that Matsuri was the Divine Tree character who attacked Gaara and Shinki. And Matsuri is the person who has Konohamaru as a target, and obviously is based on Moegi. So whatever end fight Matsuri is involved in, Konohamaru is going to, I guess, be facing her to try and free Moegi, would be the sort of idea. But is that why he's there, because of this connection? Or is it just that, like, hey, the village has decided to send Konohamaru here to investigate their allies, the sand, and what's going on here? But if that's the case, what are we investigating? Is it just to protect the sealing jutsu that Gaara is in case someone comes after it? Because that's the plan. According to at least Kankuro from the last chapter, is that, like, well, Gaara's sealed in there by a jutsu that only Shinki can undo. So the first thing we have to do is free Shinki. Whereas I think what's actually going to happen is that because Ryu can free Gaara, that's how Gaara will get freed. The problem is, how do we get out of a fight? How does Gaara escape? Because I think he has to escape. And that's, I'm guessing, what they might be able to do right here immediately. It's a bit kind of up in the air. So, I don't know, maybe we might get these exact details here that, like, okay, the two villages have discussed things. This is how you actually go about freeing one of these characters, because this is information that the characters should have access to because of the way kind of Kashin Koji's powers work. I think we basically know Boruto has this information. It's just execution is probably the key thing. I think the idea behind this seems to be that if you can defeat one of the Divine Tree characters, and I think what they're probably going to do is if you take their soul bulb thing that comes out of them back to the tree that the person is based on and do something there, that's probably how you go about freeing the person. But there might be some other details to it. It definitely relates to that soul thorn bulb thing. The other question would be that if there is a fight here, I don't think Araya, Yodo, and Konohamaru is a super strong matchup against a new Divine Tree character. Otherwise, I'm not really sure what the idea of this plot point necessarily is. How we could potentially get to a big fight is that Ryu is going to, I'm guessing, consider Gaara pretty easy pickings, because he's just trapped basically in a ceiling jutsu in the middle of that cave system, basically, in that hideout. And he knows he can undo the jutsu. The fact that he knows that solves like all of his problems. So this probably would be viewed as this should be a pretty easy get. Like literally, the already injured Gaara should be very easy to just free and consume, and that solves Ryu's kind of problem. But the defense, I'm guessing this is maybe what we're doing here, is that these are going to be here, or at least in the vicinity, to defend Gaara when something like this actually happens. Still feels mismatched. I don't think these three are going to be enough, because if Gaara plus Shinki and the other two were not enough to take out Matsuri, I think being down a person and also Gaara injured is not going to be enough, even if Gaara is able to like get back in the fight ultimately. So I'm not really sure what exactly the setups are going to be. The only thing I can think of is that they might do a thing where they build up to it's going to be a loss, but then Tamari and or Kankuro arrives, because then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more balanced, where Kankuro plus Tamari plus Konohamaru, a little bit of Gaara perhaps, and Shinki's teammates, that could be enough to at least fend off for a while someone. But that's kind of my idea here, is just that I think whatever we do, will it be in this chapter, will it be across multiple chapters going forward, I'm not sure, but I think Gaara is going to be freed because we need Gaara to be in the final fight against Ryu to save Shinki. And I think that means he has to have a chance to recover following this, and so this might just be a little bit of action that happens in the middle of our setup, build-up arc that we're doing here. So that's that. On the other side of things, Kawaki. I see no reason to really delay Kawaki confronting Amado. So unless we do something like this for like the entire chapter, this should be happening like immediately. That they've agreed to work together. Them working together basically hinges upon Kawaki being stronger. The way to make that happen is for Kawaki to talk to Amado. They clearly do not have the time and don't want to do a full-on training arc, so instead it's just going to be this character confrontation will lead to a power boost for Kawaki. Now, the nuance behind this is, of course, that Amado knows Kawaki is needed for him to have a chance at bringing Akebi back. He has been able to logic his way through omnipotence to figure out that it's Kawaki who will allow that to happen and not Boruto. So that is obviously the explanation behind why Amado has kind of triggered a lot of Kawaki's like defensive capabilities, but not offensive potentially. He doesn't want him getting hurt so that his chance to get his daughter back doesn't, die. So I don't see any way that Amado can prevent this from happening. Obviously, he has all this clever stuff going on. He once again might have some way to sort of, be like, oh, I have a shutdown command here, so if you kill me, it'll trigger and you'll die, or something like that. There's a way he can have control over what Kawaki does, We could also do something crazy, like literally have it be like, okay, then let's do the deal right now. I will do this if you immediately right now bring Akebi back. But they haven't in a very long time gone into the details surrounding this. And is there a twist to it that in whatever method would bring Akebi back, does Kawaki get lost in the process? Or is it just like, we literally just need your power to make this happen? Feels like there's something more to this, but we'll have to wait and see. Because, of course, I think we all know Amado probably still has a bunch of extra information that we really want to know about, and it's just about getting to that point. And then, yeah, this is just a more general point, but it's the idea of, okay, say Kawaki gets his power boost. They're going to team up together to face Jura, it seems like. How can Kawaki fight at full power next to Boruto without the resonance stuff activating? Because the core of Kawaki's power is that he is the one who's going to use the Karma mark to its extreme. Whereas Boruto's is more the fact that he's done crazy advanced shinobi training and has basically all of the jutsus he would have as a more veteran shinobi already. But he's not skilled in the Karma stuff himself, so what are we doing here is the real question. Is an interesting one. They're obviously going to have to get around this in some way so they can actually fight together side by side, but this probably brings up actually this one first of all, which is that, like, what's Boruto going to do while Kawaki gets his power boost? Is Boruto going to speak with Koji again? Is he going to go maybe plan some things with Shikamaru and Mitsuki? Talk to other characters or something like that? We just don't know. Because there's also the idea of, like, well, Boruto seems to have a connection to two of the Divine Tree characters, where Hidari and Jura are going to be who he kind of has to help out. Now, my guess is that ultimately what will happen here is that unless we're doing these very much one by one, if they are going to have them all happen sort of back to back to back, but with the idea being that, like, one character can't be involved in multiple fights, it's going to be Sarada's fight, I guess, to face Hidari to save her father, I think is more of the idea, but we'll see what they actually plan to do. With Code, it's again this idea of the writing on him is, it's funny that this actually super powerful character who has basically been given the destiny of Ishiki Otsutsuki has just lost every fight that he's been involved in since that. And he just comes across more and more pathetic in every single scene. And the last chapter, he was just completely taken advantage of and came across so poorly. The problem that's going to happen for him, if the deal that he's undergoing right now is that he has to kill Boruto and people related to Boruto. He certainly doesn't, as far as we're aware in the series up to now, have the ability to defeat Boruto unless Boruto is in a very vulnerable position. When Kawaki gets his upgrade, Kawaki's going to be so much more powerful than Code as well, because I think the idea is that this will bring Kawaki up to Boruto's level. And then all of a sudden, what's he even doing at that point? The way I view Code in the series is that he is still powerful enough to get in the way. He is still powerful enough to cause issues for a bunch of characters. And I mean that for, like, the Divine Tree characters, but also our hero characters as well. It feels like we're building to him doing something, in a way, kind of like the fact that he started this all by sort of not knowing what adding his claw mark powers to the tailed beast would do. He's going to do something like that again that will either help him or result in his, like, defeat or death or something like that, but turn things around. There's maybe the slight chance we do the side switch with him of just like, hey, I'm being taken advantage of by the villains. Is it worth it at this point? I think that there's so much character work to do, I think, to get to some sort of a side switch for it to mean anything with him. So it just feels like a lot of screen time is probably needed with Code to get something more out of him, but he's still there and interesting enough, which is an interesting position for him. final things is basically just like, hey, Himawari, are we doing anything with her anytime soon? Like, that's really interesting where you left her off with the Ninetales powers, but what's next is sort of the idea. Same really for Sarada and Sumire, where, okay, Sarada is going to, I guess, fight with Hidari at some point, but what's the status of her powers and stuff like that? We really need to get that update. I'm assuming they're saving it for the final fight where she'll use the Mangekyo again, but it also feels like we probably need a little bit of backstory on like how she's trained it in any way. And then when it comes to Sumire, it's like, okay, when it comes to a fight, we haven't really focused on her. Is she going to get involved in the action? And then when she does, like, it does feel like you probably need to explain her abilities again with the whole Nue thing. Even I forget it because like it's been ages since I watched the anime where basically all of that information is. So there's a lot of stuff with her that needs to come into play. Not to mention just the core idea of like, let's not forget they still haven't really explained how these two were not affected by omnipotence either. So, but that feels like it's been forgotten as like like the third or fourth, fifth side plot. Because we're dealing with the Divine Tree characters, and the omnipotent sort of Kawaki being behind it plot is going to come up into play afterwards. So there's still plot points once we get through these villains, if that's kind of what we're doing here. Because again, we have to get to that flash forward scene with Boruto versus Kawaki, which I think they've muddied the waters on a little bit with the idea of like we have the Kashin Koji ability that they can get away with sort of having that scene work a little bit differently, because maybe initially they showed us one outcome of Boruto Kawaki, but we'll see a slightly different version, but who knows. I overall would say I don't think we're too far away from the big fights happening, and by that I do mean like basically all 5 Divine Tree characters basically being paired off against their targets plus related characters, and us doing kind of the kind of finale of this. Now, my guess is once we start that's going to be 5 fights that probably has to take place over the course of like 2 or 3 volumes or something like that. So it's once we get going on that, it's going to take a while because again, we're doing Ryu against, I'm assuming most of the Sand characters are just going to be on that side of things, and probably no Leaf characters, so there's that. Jura obviously against Kawaki and Boruto, maybe with Kashin Koji as well. We'll see where he pops up again. The Bug character who they named a while ago, I forget the name off the top of my head. His target is Ada, so it'd be like, I guess, Ada and Demon against him. And again, Demon is effectively the most powerful character in the series as far as we're aware. Jura versus Demon, I don't know what the situation is there, but that's an interesting one in terms of like, are more characters going to be involved there? Because that's the one where like you haven't really done almost like any of the work about like what exactly that dynamic is. So I think you need to do a lot more setup on that side of things, especially when it comes to like Ada doesn't really fight, so that's just Demon defending his sister, and we don't really know what the situation is there. Matsuri, of course, against, I guess, Konohamaru plus Shikadai and his team. That one sort of writes itself, basically. Hidari, again, Sarada, Sumire, Boruto, maybe it depends on where all the moving parts are in all of this. And then there's so many other characters who you want to know what's going on with them, but we don't actually know what's going to happen in the end. Plus, I wouldn't rule out the idea that we maybe see more characters get introduced, but in terms of like proper notable characters, I think that's it. But then we can't forget also that like Code is now out there hunting Boruto and co. So someone's going to have to deal with him along the way whenever they decide to like activate that plot point. Plus, there are just in general claw grimes that other characters can deal with. So, A lot of moving parts. That's the big thing that I would say here. It definitely feels like, okay, after a lot of the earlier volumes felt like, okay, the pretty minimal number of characters were being reintroduced to here in Two Blue Vortex. Now all of a sudden, anything and everything sort of could happen in the next like couple of chapters, basically. Not super sure specifically what's going to happen here, because like I said, is the sand stuff from the preview page like going to be a huge part of the chapter, or just a teaser for kind of more to come? Is the actual focus going to be more on Kawaki and Amado? Hard to say, because sometimes it feels like it's the most obvious thing in the world, but they wait a chapter to do it. Other times they'll just absolutely surprise you with what they decide to focus on. Like, we could have a mostly Himawari focused chapter next time out again. We just don't actually know. So I'm excited for chapter 16, definitely, and going onwards to see what they do. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are going into chapter 16. What do you think they're going to do, and where are you at with the series at this point, like about to hit its 4th full volume? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.